Hey there, welcome to episode 88 of the FFS Talk audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo. We're recording this at 2:41 p.m. Thursday, July 31st, the end of July already, 2025. Episode 88 already, that's also kind of fun. Today's title and topic, Solipsism. We'll get into what that actually means if you're not familiar. In the meantime, if this is your first time joining in on a FFS Talk audio program, I should tell you that FFS Talk is intended to be a audio program with guests, wherein we discuss things that work, things that do not work, and what we might do about them. Thus far, this is episode 88. There have been this many episodes where it is a monologue, an audio essay of sorts, or what I prefer to think of as planting seeds for future discussion. Today is certainly one of those, as they all are. The FFS Talk audio program thus is intended to be something of a debate or a discussion or a conversation at the very least about the world around us, and again, the things that work, the things that do not, and what we might do about them. Sometimes the part about what we might do about them is kind of left hanging. It's hard to say in every case, although, hey, might as well throw out some idea and see what people think. So that's where that is. By the way, if you're not familiar with what FFS means, you need to hang out with more Irish people. Hopefully, wherever you've located this audio program, you're able to also locate the episode description, which contains the show notes, including a summary, which I will read to you. It's brief. And some links for today's episode, 3, shameless self-promotion, and I have a brief comment about that in general, and then 2 links about today's episode, or relevant, apropos for today's episode. So let's get started so we can get finished on this Thursday afternoon. The summary of today's episode: the philosophical notion of solipsism is a bit extreme, while the more practical definition or common use leans more towards individualism or egocentrism, or basically being a little bit selfish. Whatever the words we use, are we too selfish? The links for today's program: my profile page on buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo has links to all of my audio programming, various projects, affiliate links to my favorite coffee beans, affiliate links to a couple of other things, some biographical information at the top of that profile page. And if you're interested in the Buy Me an Update audio program published on Monday mornings, it is a brief 5 minutes or less microcast, an update on the previous week's audio program topics, and any news and announcements upcoming. And then the Coffee Solo audio program hosted on ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/Dan Hugo/posts. The hyphen is next to the 0 on most keyboards, ko-fi.com/Dan Hugo/posts. Now, that's an audio program about anything. There's no particular focus on any topic or topic area, and it's published whenever. So it's whenever, whatever. Both the Buy Me an Update and Coffee Solo audio programs are indeed published on their respective buymeacoffee.com and ko-fi.com platforms, which I use for audience engagement. You're under no obligation to spend any money on either of those platforms to consume those. However, in addition to those, I have begun publishing the same exact content on Spotify, the Spotify creator platform. So a free outlet for these audio programs, which includes RSS feeds. So if you normally listen to audio programming podcasts with a podcatcher, some RSS compatible news reader / podcast capturing tools, you can do so. Neither Buy Me a Coffee nor ko-fi.com publish RSS feeds for their content. So that is now enabled. In addition, all of my programs, except for Let's Innovate for Vegas, are available on iTunes and Amazon podcasts and a few other places. That the number of places where you'll find these will grow as I try to get all this sorted out. So there you go. On to the specific links for today's episode. Philosophical solipsism, detailed on a Wikipedia page. Solipsism. Solipsism as a philosophy is a little bit intense. It's essentially discounting the world around us. Whatever exists is in our own heads. I think some people actually behave that way. But there's also a usage of solipsism, which is really about selfishness or egocentrism, basically being concerned about oneself and one's own self-interest. That's usually how I use the word, but it is interesting to take a look at what solipsism is from a philosophical standpoint, so you can check that out if you want. And the prisoner's dilemma is an example, I think, of where self-interest can be tangibly felt, the impact of, the outcome of the interaction with others and those outcomes. So the prisoner's dilemma, also a Wikipedia page, you can check that out. I'm going to read a quick description from that page soon about the prisoner's dilemma if you're not familiar. So the deeper meaning, so we'll start there and then we'll get back to like a normal, casual definition. Solipsism from a philosophical standpoint is pretty deep. If you happen to flip through that Wikipedia article, you will come across one mention that some feel that human infants are born solipsistic, since they really have no connection to other beings of any kind or anything really in the world around them, until somewhere along the line, that aha moment, if babies do that, I assume they do in some way, some sort of a noise or a gurgle or a coo or something, they realize that they are indeed a part of a world around them. There are other babies and parents and others around them. But initially, in those early days, maybe even weeks, there's, what is it? I cannot remember the term, but it's when you play peekaboo with a baby, there's a persistence, object persistence. Like when they close their eyes or you cover their eyes, playing peekaboo, they don't connect objects that were there before they close their eyes to objects that are there when they reopen their eyes. So that object persistence or permanence, I think it is. So that's where there's that sense of surprise. Ooh, a thing is in front of me that kind of looks like a person, if I knew what a person was. So kind of interesting. Kind of that alone, I think, was, I didn't really think about that before I was putting this episode together. That is kind of fascinating. I sometimes wonder if some fraction of people do not quite reach the point of getting over infant solipsism. Or they do, but they slide back into a singular thinking mode while I'm being half facetious here. If you look around, if you really consider some of the people around you with whom you engage, perhaps you also find some of these people are not really aware of others. They know other people exist, so they're not truly solipsistic at that point, but not really, if you're picking up what I'm putting down. So there's a lot of philosophical consideration of this term, this notion. Maybe babies are solipsistic. Maybe they grow out of it. Maybe it comes back. But what we are talking about today in this episode is a more practical view that solipsism exists in a form of egocentrism, where a solipsist, and if you're an Ayn Rand fan, maybe you're getting ahead of me and you'll think, oh, maybe they're an objectivist. But a solipsist, I like that term because it's rarely used, is clearly and perhaps obviously concerned primarily with themselves and their agenda, possibly at the expense of others. Are you familiar with the term coopetition? Sort of a made-up word, but not really. Humans are social beings, as pretty well known, I hope, so that we benefit from interactions of many kinds with other humans. Something that most of the infants out there realize early on, that when they run into other infants that are about their height, speak a similar language, I suppose, early on, and which most adult humans remember eventually. There are entire industries built around introductions, communications, networking, transactional social gatherings and interactions for business or something else perhaps. And the list goes on and on. Obviously, each individual person is focused somewhat on themselves. This would or should not surprise anyone. We each have needs, the Maslow stack, the hierarchy with shelter and food and safety and all that stack. And those need to be balanced against these friend and colleague, group, and general social interactions that may involve the interests of others, balanced against the interests of the self. Social interaction is in the Maslow hierarchy, but personal safety, security, shelter, food, all those are a little bit more basal. They're at the base. They're the fundamentals on which our other needs might be met. What we really end up with is some co-opetition, where sometimes we need to cooperate with others for survival, for friendship and comfort, for business and growth, any number of reasons. While at other times we must compete against others, maybe some of those same others, for our own interests, which we endeavor to drive towards some success or some win, however we might define these types of outcome. If we're competing against our good friend for that last slice of pizza, it's a very simple version, but at some point, somebody's going to have to win. That balance might be the thing we should be looking at, and whether people are attempting it, or are they leaning far too heavily into their own solipsistic tendencies, or objective, if you like. Really, it's radical individualism if you're an Ayn Rand fan, but we'll get there. So the prisoner's dilemma, I have that Wikipedia link that I refer to, and it's a universal game theory example. Everybody uses it. Allow me to read this brief summary of what this game is from the Wikipedia page I mentioned in the links at the top of this episode, also available in the episode description for you to click on. Let me navigate to that page. Oh, I still have it open. Hey, what a trick. There's a section called Premise. I'm reading from the typical contemporary version of the game, as described in William Poundstone's 1993 book, Prisoner's Dilemma. To wit, two members of a criminal gang are arrested and imprisoned. Each prisoner is in solitary confinement with no means of speaking to or exchanging messages with the other. The police admit they don't have enough evidence to convict the pair on the principal charge. They plan to sentence both to a year in prison on a lesser charge. Simultaneously, the police offer each prisoner a Faustian bargain, and that's a link if you want to learn more about that. If he testifies against his partner, he will go free, while the partner will get 3 years in prison on the main charge, assuming that's what they testify to. Oh yes, there is a catch. If both prisoners testify against each other, both will be sentenced to 2 years in jail. I don't know how realistic this actually is from a sentencing guidelines perspective, but you get the point. The prisoners are given a little time to think this over, but in no case may either learn what the other has decided until he has irrevocably made his decision. We're using the literary he and his here, so it doesn't really matter who these characters are. Each is informed that the other prisoner is being offered the very same deal. Each prisoner is concerned only with his own welfare, with minimizing his own prison sentence. This leads to 3 different possible outcomes for prisoners A and B. And there's a 2x2 payoff matrix if you would like to look at it, visualize it. But if both prisoners, both A and B, if they both remain silent, they will each serve 1 year in prison. If one testifies against the other doesn't, but the other doesn't. So one stays quiet, the other one testifies against, A testifies against B, or B testifies against A while the other remains silent. The one testifying will be set free while the other serves 3 years in prison. If A and B testify against each other, they will each serve 2 years. Game theory in general is pretty interesting. It's worth a read if you're curious. In general, not just that article. As I always say, Wikipedia, great place to begin a search for knowledge. Not the best place to end one. Who among us has not seen a classic mob movie, or maybe the Sopranos series on HBO? We all know, whether we know the term or not, omerta, the code of silence, which presupposes that both, or all if there's more than 2, detained will take the silent option rather than ratting out the other or others. This allows for some predictable outcomes based on accepted norms within these family businesses, these fraternal organizations, until someone decides that they themselves are more important than the others, that omerta has been okay until now, but now it is time to make a deal for personal interests. Generally speaking, and if you read over the Wikipedia article and maybe continue delving into game theory, the best decision is for both parties to defect. The prisoner's dilemma is essentially a demonstration of that, or turn against each other. In other words, act in the best self-interest against the other, so that both lose, production by a street, so that both lose but with minimal cost. In other words, if both prisoners are going to go with their own self-interest, if they're going to act as rational participants, I'm going to act in my best interest, so is the other person, and therefore we will get the sentence for testifying against each other in unison. So it's the 2-year sentence. That's the way it is. But it's better than one getting 3 years and the other going free if you look at math that way. It's when each is presumed to act in their own self-interest as rational participants, which is why omerta was the actual best outcome, but the least practical. If both remain silent, you'll both get the minimum sentence, 1 year, on a lesser charge. So you won't be charged with the crime. You'll be charged with something less. We all act in our own self-interest when push comes to shove, and that's what games like The Prisoner's Dilemma will demonstrate. And you can play along at home if you like. So the take-home, the reason I've made that reference, is that we tend to act in our own self-interest, and that's usually a good outcome. That's usually the outcome that will end up being a reasonable payoff, not necessarily the one that seems intuitively better, but it's mathematically better. Sometimes intuitively better. Obviously, if both remain quiet, you'd both get 1 year. That seems like a better outcome, but it's not the one that tends to happen, again, because omerta only goes so far. So let us suppose this scenario. I will use myself as the principal in this case. I have my own entrepreneurial endeavors or business interests, which are an important part of my overall security and safety for myself and family. So to meet my Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I need to be successful in my business and business endeavors. Maybe a small number of close, longtime friends are in there. So friends, family, close friends and family. This drives my primary actions in pursuit of those interests. So those are essentially my self-interests. At the same time, I have more casual friends, colleagues, clients, and customers, potential collaborators, potential clients and customers, and the general public to contend with now and then. In various scenarios, some leaning towards furthering my business and my own interests, others more sociable, maybe even leaning towards the interests of others, maybe. How do I balance these? Should I always favor my own interests, taking a substantially solipsistic stance out in the world? And again, solipsistic from a self-centric and egocentric perspective, not the philosophical disregard for the world outside of my own existence. That's a little bit more deep than we need to go for this discussion. Or you can choose objectivism and radical self-interest if you prefer. Or is there a long-tail consideration to be made here, where my own interests might actually be served on a longer time horizon, and at the same time, my own efforts might contribute to the efforts and possible successes of others? It is this long tail, or the opposite of immediate gratification, that might not be on everyone's radar. In my travels in the greater Vegas area of late, but also beyond, I am seeing the pendulum of personalities having swung towards solipsism in many cases, too many cases. And once again, solipsism from a self-centric, egocentric, individualist perspective, not the deeply philosophical disregard for the outside world and its existence. Although sometimes I think that might apply too. Stop me if you've run into this, where you connect with someone on the awful LinkedIn website, or you have an existing long-time LinkedIn connection, still awful website, and that connection never, ever responds in any way to your outreach. You have colleagues who only reach out to you if they need something, maybe on LinkedIn or maybe elsewhere. Or if they will be in your locality. This is not uncommon being in Vegas. It happens all the time. Hey, I'm coming to Vegas, but I haven't heard from you in like 10 years. Or both, but remain silent otherwise. People who show up to gatherings to pitch their wares, to attempt to gain new clients rather than behaving like a normal human being, just being a social human person. It would be easy to chalk this up to, though that's the way it is everywhere, but that is the point. It is much more often the way it is. Do you agree? Do you do these things yourself? Are you solipsistic? Everybody is to a certain degree from this selfish or egocentric or individualist perspective. It's a matter of degree. Or maybe you really don't acknowledge the existence of a world outside your own reflections, internal reflections. So does this work? Normally I would, as a solo presenter, in each of these episodes each week suggests that what works is humans interacting. What does not work is a stronger drive towards solipsism, or individualism if you prefer, that you may be experiencing as much and as often as I am personally. So speaking in the first person from my perspective and the way I've encountered these things, I've formed my opinion about what works and what does not. And you might have a similar or differing opinion or set of opinions. And I would ponder what comes next. However, and since I have no guest, I will leave this for possible discussion at this point in the future, whether the practical rather than philosophical considerations of a solipsistic existence are good or bad for the one and the many, so to speak. Star Trek fans out there, you know. If you happen to be a fan or at least familiar with Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged in particular, that's quite a book if you make it through. Don't even bother with a movie version. Those are train wrecks, somewhat ironically. You may be familiar with with her, Ayn Rand, the author, leaning heavily into objectivism, where there is an objective reality rather than the solipsistic view that there is only one's own internal reality to perceive. The outside world is insignificant, irrelevant, doesn't even exist. However, while these are at odds philosophically, and Ayn Rand actually acknowledged this, that she discounts solipsism with a preference for objectivism, I would assert that both objectivism and solipsism are platforms for self-centered pursuits. The difference among philosophers is whether others and the world at large are considered at all. In objectivism, there is an outside world, but you're still thinking about yourself. I'm totally simplifying things here, but you should read about objectivism and radical individualism if you like. What we can arrive at in common with both is practical and radical, perhaps, individualism. The focus on one's own needs, goals, pursuits, and perhaps to what degree those of others are discounted. You thought I was going to be thinking about other people? No. Atlas shrugs, but so do those around us. If you have a long period of free time, read over the book. It is interesting, sort of. It's one of those books that you should have in your reading history, whether it's not necessarily, well, it is a bit of a slog to read through it. You may agree with it, you may disagree with it. Some people are big fans of Ayn Rand and radical individualism and objective reality and so on. But to at least have that context will come in handy. It will serve you to some degree. I will focus on me and mine and only give my time and attention to others if it suits me, says the individualist. And you might even exit the world and go off to live in the woods or in some gold economy colony tucked away, hidden from the rest of the society, and take all of your knowledge with you, robbing the world of it. Is this the way of the world around us? Does it suit you to ponder, to answer that rhetorical question? I don't think it's that extreme. I think we're still in a state where people who do have something to offer want to capitalize on it, but I think there is a tendency to be completely driven to a selfish capital acquisition, profit. The profit motive is strong and real. So, of course, an objective reality is one where you can extract profit, but not necessarily consider those around us. Mark Zuckerberg. Oh, I was thinking about something else. So what to do about it? That's the traditional final part of the three-part consideration of the FFS Talk audio program. I think there are two questions to ask here. Are solipsism or objectivism? Is the notion of individualism from either or both of those driving a more self-centric social environment at large? And then what is the impact of this possibility? The first question may actually be more along the lines of how one person might characterize, say, their first and second degree connections on an individual basis, or maybe groups of their interlocutors in summary, and then how their classification of those groups impacts interaction with those groups, perhaps the value of those interactions. So in other words, how much time do I put into ranking or valuing my interlocutors, the people I interact with, engage with, either on an individual basis? That probably happens often, but more common perhaps, or easier, would be to just group people into that group of people. You don't need to spend time or some might say waste time with certain groups of people that are pursuing things not interesting to me in the near term. They may be really interesting later, but who knows? Don't even think about that. I think it might be interesting to include in a rolling introspective survey, perhaps at scale, some inputs about how one views their own interactions and motivations, and how that person views the interactions and motivations they encounter with their interlocutors. In other words, am I discounting or discounting is a fine word. Am I discounting those around me outside of a certain radius, right? My closest friends, my family, my own interests, those are probably ranked pretty high, probably in that order. But am I discounting the interests of others? Am I only seeking interaction when I need something from them? So I extend the olive branch temporarily, perhaps. And then am I getting the same thing back? Am I feeling the same sort of, sometimes it feels like disdain. Am I just a favor provider, an ATM of assistance, favors is a good word. It would be interesting to know those things and how those perceptions change over time. Now, a true solipsist would not acknowledge such introspection. They really wouldn't care what other people think. There are no other people. But from a practical standpoint, would people, yourself included, participate in such a rolling introspection? That means ongoing, maybe even reevaluating particular individuals or groups of people with whom we interact or don't, to determine whether their own individualist, possibly egocentric tendencies are having some impact, negative or positive, on others, and whether the tendencies of others are having an impact on you. This is an experiment we could actually conduct. And that, I think, is what we might do about it to start. So there we go. I think we can leave it there today. Don't forget, all of my audio programming is now available via RSS feeds, published as the primary source at the moment on Spotify, on the Spotify Creator platform. The links to the profile pages for that platform are available in my buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo profile. So when you get to those profile pages for each of my audio programs, you will find links to Spotify, Amazon Music /podcasts, iTunes, some other platforms. And ideally, there will be a move towards making Spotify and those platforms kind of the secondary, so that each production, each audio program will have its own primary point of publication. I've been talking about this forever. It has slipped down below page 3 of my to-do list, but it really needs to move back up. So eventually we'll get there, but do be aware that all of my audio programming is now associated with RSS feeds that you can subscribe to, that you can consume in whatever ways you like. And now you can find this and most, except for Let's Innovate for Vegas, you can find all the rest on iTunes, Amazon Music /podcasts, whatever they call it this week, and other platforms, and more coming. So thank you for listening. Thank you for taking part. And as always, consider whether you would like to participate in an actual conversation. What do you think works? What do you think does not? And what do you think we could do about it, whatever it is? This is episode 88. There are certainly many topics that I've broached over the many weeks. Pick one or bring your own. Take care. Thank you for listening as always. Catch you next week.